So Arnold Palmer, welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. Roberto Perez, Mark Murash, but off camera, we're mentioning about Arnold Palmer having just passed. And now Arnold Palmer loved to tell a story. He was a great storyteller. And he loved to tell a story about the girlfriend he had that had tattooed on her, excuse me, that had tattooed on your name here. And it was one of those soupy sales kind of stories that we like to dwell on occasionally. But anyway, so last night we were talking about education in Connecticut. We started talking about the issues now with education. We went back to Sheff v. O'Neill, Sheff versus O'Neill, O'Neill being the governor at the time, and how the courts ruled that Connecticut's educational system was unequal because richer school systems had a lot more money to spend on their students than the poorer school districts, and how the attempt was made to rectify that by bringing into play something called the educational cost system, where the state of Connecticut gives back proportionately according to need money to school systems so that the poorer school systems get a larger portion of this fund money back than the richer school systems. Now, good thought, good idea, but here we are decades later, and we still have a very similar problem. As Roberto mentioned, we have kids in Bridgeport. Bridgeport can't afford to have enough school buses, so there are high school kids in Bridgeport that have to walk or take the bus a long distance to schools, and in some cases it's a couple, 3 miles, because there's not a school bus to pick them up. So they're either on the city bus line or they're walking a distance, and it's not the kind of thing you would run into if you lived in Greenwich. And the way the problem wasn't solved was that in a richer school district, and I'll choose Greenwich because I grew up there, there are parents that have tons of money. Let's face it, they've got a lot of cha-ching to throw into after-school activities, sports, art, literature, chess club. They have that additional money that they do not have in poorer school districts. So you still have that inequality in spite of the things that are being done, and our state is looking at ways to try to further rectify the situation so that you get closer. And I'm going to throw a quick word in for one, what would be one very good way of correcting the situation, is to have all education in Connecticut funded through the state of Connecticut through taxpayers paying a state income tax. And you might pay a little higher on your state income tax, but what that would do for all towns in Connecticut is it would reduce property taxes, because property taxes are what proportionally pay almost all of our educational expenses now. So that if you take from one hand and pay more according to your income on a state income tax, but you pay less on property tax in your municipality, that kind of balances out. And by having money doled out by the state of Connecticut to each child in each district, you have what's closer to an equal funding for education. There's still going to be, wealthy parents that have, money to do extra for their kids, and I don't think we can ever correct that. If we do, nobody's thought of it yet. With that, education, bring us up to snuff on education. What's going on in Connecticut?
Well, as far as I can tell, the education system in Connecticut is still lacking in providing an equal footing for all kids and opportunities. They don't have, out of what you just mentioned, extracurricular activities. They've cut back. They can't afford for kids to be involved in sports, or they've cut back on after-school activities where the parent might need an after-school program to help, because they can't leave work to go get their kid. The school bus does not go anywhere near where they live. So there's a combination of things that are going on, and not just in Connecticut. So, we've promised our kids a better and brighter future. You can do whatever you want. And yet, we seem to be creating these stumbling blocks, and we can't get it right yet. I mean, I'm hoping that it will happen, but, it's still a big uphill climb. So
now, let's go on to another thing that I think we all can probably agree upon in that we don't like it. And Mark, what are standardized tests and how do they affect our school systems?
Well, standardized testing, I think, comes back to why is it that it costs so much to educate a kid in the public schools today? You're teaching to a test. Everyone, I mean, standardized, everyone's learning the same thing, because if the students don't do well enough on the test, then there's less tax dollars coming down. The teachers are worried about teaching to the test, because if their students don't do well enough, then they're going to be looked at as not doing their job. Here's the thing that I don't understand and I've never seen an answer for. When I was a kid in the Stanford public schools, we had standardized testing, but we also had all of our teachers making up their curriculums. It wasn't one curriculum for everyone. The teachers reveled in teaching, this teacher was known for this and this was known for that. And we still did our standardized testing. We all got our percentiles and the whole thing, which looking back on, you realize that sort of strange competition in the couple of weeks out of the year, twice a year, or whatever it was, you realize you could have been learning during that time. And really, what are you doing? You're justifying what eventually became purchased curriculum. I mean, that's what Common Core math is more than anything, is justifying a different way of doing math so that a corporation who creates the worksheets, the books, and the whole curriculum can get paid. And so you're not in school to learn, or you're there to get information, but you're not there to learn to enjoy learning.
To get your brain focused on its own, to ask questions, to be creative, to say, well, that makes sense to you, but it doesn't make sense to me. So how about if this happened or if that happened? And that's how, I guess, the more creative folks, the scientists and people who create art, or they let their minds just go out there, and if something catches their fancy, they pursue it. And the only way they can pursue it is if they have a little background of, how do I educate myself further? And I think that's where a lot of it is lacking as well. They're not igniting that fire in them to, I don't think you're wrong, but can I look at the other side of this? Can I find something else that might be as important?
And learning that it's okay to answer a question in class and be wrong.
Right.
Because those mistakes, as we always hear time and time again, those mistakes are what lead to so many scientific advancements. But we were talking before about seeing where to invade next. And we think it was Finland, where they're talking, where all the teachers and administrators are saying the kids need to play. They need to be kids. And on a personal level, we decided the same thing. Our little one started kindergarten. Lucian started kindergarten this year. And he spent his entire life learning out in the world. And we knew that going to school would be difficult, but we wanted him to go, social, friends, and the whole thing. And all he said his first 3 days there were, all we do is sit there. And you've got classrooms with toys and the wooden kitchens that we all played with as kids. And you would get up, you'd play, you'd run, you'd have blocks, you'd build towers and the whole thing. And we were told in no uncertain terms that the kindergarten curriculum now is to sit and learn. It is an education curriculum and not a play curriculum. And we pulled them out and said, we're going to homeschool. Because there was no way, after him being bright and enthusiastic and wanting to learn and being able to talk with people, we wanted him to learn that learning is to sit at a desk. I sit at a desk most of the day. I don't want him to learn that sitting at a desk is a thing to do.
The norm.
That which might be, in fact, what the purpose of making kids sit at a desk for 6 hours a day, they might be prepping them for a job.
To do that in the workplace.
To be that in the workplace, to be at a desk for 6 hours a day in a cubicle doing the same type of monotonous type of tasks. Now,
Books and movies.
education doesn't have to be monotonous. And math
shouldn't be.
Math is a perfect example, because there are many, many ways of arriving at an answer in math. And it's not just like Alice in Wonderland, the updated version, where they talk about addition, subtraction, uglification, and derision. There are many, many ways of arriving at an answer in math, whether you're doing those types of problems or whether you're looking at more, I'm not going to say complex, because for some people they're not complex, algebraic types of things, calculus types of things, derivatives, which of course we all know about through the stock exchange, and what goes on there with derivatives. Same principle though. But in mathematics you have a lot of ways of arriving at an answer, and you have to encourage kids to find the way that makes more sense to their particular way, the way their brain is wired.
And it kind of comes back to the old 1984 Orwellian,
yeah.
2 + 2 = 5. It was kind of a predecessor of Common Core math. It's like now when someone says, well, a vote for Jill Stein is a vote for Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm. And the answer to that is, of course, what?
Yes, exactly.
What in the world are you saying?
But it's that turning education, that turning information around and making it just rote regurgitation into standardized testing, and you're learning to justify the administration.
But now, do you think that those adults now who are in control, who were fortunate enough to be they were educated in a freer environment, are now, the irony I think is now that they've gotten theirs, they want to change the way it's done, so that to make it more, boxy.
They're being forced. They're being forced to do it, or they're allowing themselves to be forced to do it rather than
bottom line,
rather than rebelling against
the
that.
bottom line. I graduated from West Hill in 1846 or something. And,
Come on, West Hill wasn't even put in then. That was like 1985
the
or
West
something.
Hills at that time.
Yeah.
But a year or two after I left, I remember talking to friends who were still in high school, and all of the really quality teachers, the ones who everyone wanted to have their class, the ones who you talked about year after year, who when you were a freshman you learned these were the teachers you want to have as junior, all of them got their contracts bought out and retired because they couldn't afford to pay them what their essentially cost of living union, thankfully, increases were.
Right.
And you think to yourself, I can't imagine all of the kids coming in, and I'm sure there are other teachers who came in who were good and developed over time, but there's something in that experience and those teachers that the legend and lore of those teachers is passed down that you can't replace.
Yeah. Sure.
It's not like baseball, where you look at a guy like Alex Rodriguez and you say, well, he's 40 years old. You really can't do this anymore. It's time to retire.
Past his prime.
Teachers can continue being really good teachers pretty much to the time they drop. And a lot of them want to stay and do it because they enjoy what they're doing, and that's what makes a good quality teacher.
Yes.
Now, you also have in education, you've had a serious cutback in things other than the basics. Art, music, things that motivate kids, that kids want to do, that kids want to, if you want to be good at art or you want to be good at music, well, you better learn the basics in mathematics or you're not going to be able to be good in that. Kids figure that out. And when they have an opportunity to be good at what they like, if and only if they learn the basics, they'll learn the basics.
Well, let's, in that regard, I'm going to give a local shout out because it's worthwhile. We hear so much now about STEM education, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. Well, here in Danbury, the Danbury Library and the Danbury Hackerspace have expanded that to STEAM. They add in the A for arts.
Oh,
and
nice.
so they know how important it is. And so once a year, twice a year now, they do a STEAM fair. at the Danbury Library, which is an
that's
all-day event. And they have all sorts of, everything from robotics things to Lego things to art things, and the hacker space is open, and it's an amazing. They have music, the whole thing. Some of it's hands-on music and things that people have created. October 15th, I think it is, at the Danbury Library. They're doing their next STEAM fair, and it's worth going and supporting and celebrating and showing, really, the town of Danbury that there is a support for that type of outside the desk and chair education.
And you say art. Art also includes performing arts, and it includes painting, and maybe you want to be a sculptor. That's art. So yeah, that's awesome that it's being done by the library.
You want to be good at, as an actor, you better learn how to read well.
Absolutely.
You better learn the basics in reading.
Maybe in 2 languages.
To have a chance to have an opportunity. But the kudos for mentioning that about the this theme, this whole notion of art. Now, alluding back to Lucian in his classroom and his discomfort with having all these cool things there to play with and learn from, and not being able to do that, how much, it's a rhetorical question, of course, but how much can you learn from building towers of blocks? You can learn a tremendous amount in not just interaction with other kids and working together to do these things as a team, but also the notion of mathematics and gravity and things, scientific things that go into play.
Did he say he was bored when he came home? How did you find out basically that you needed to bring him home to be homeschooled?
The first 3 days, each time, the first thing he said was, all we did was sit there, I'm bored. They'd either sit at the desk or they'd sit on the floor. And that amount of time of interacting with the other students was essentially reduced to 20 minutes at recess and the lunchtime. And so, like you said, teamwork. How do you really learn to interact with people if you're all sitting there raising your hand, essentially in competition, waiting to get called on?
Call on me.
Yeah. And then not. And then you get people who don't want to raise their hand because they don't want to not get called on. Or then you get the kids who don't want to raise their hand because they're afraid to be wrong. And I mean, when there are 20 kids in a class and you're there for 6 hours, you're going to get called on once or twice, and that's fine. You wait. You learn to wait your turn.
Sure. They'll get to me
sharing.
eventually.
Of course. But there's a going to homeschooling for me was a revelation because, and it's funny, you think you understand it, that it's homeschooling. Well, it took me realizing it's not school at home. I thought, how are we going to fill his entire day? And I started going online, reading. People have blogs where they say, this is what our day was today, homeschooling. This is what, and I realized, when you compress it down into a small amount of time, when you're working one-on-one, or you're out with a group of folks who are homeschooling, because there are homeschooling co-ops around, you can get to those lessons if you're trying to do a math or a reading or letters or what have you, and the rest of the day becomes exploration.
Yes.
And it was like, boom, light bulb. Of course it's not him having to do 6 hours at home. It becomes a very different environment. And it's a little thing, but when I made that realization, I went, all right, yeah, we can do this. And you realize kids are bright. They're all bright. No matter what you say, they're bright. They pick things up like that.
They can learn languages at a very early age, and I don't understand why we don't try and do that more, where they can learn, obviously, English, French, Spanish, whatever the language that the parent really wants to introduce. They can pick it up, and it becomes as a second nature to them. So yeah.
And so if I know he's bright, and we know all these kids are bright, does it matter if they learn to read by the time they're 6 or by the time they're 8? Of course not. But when you put them in that situation where there are kids moving ahead of them, and they're
graded, and he got an 80, but I got a 75. So what did I do wrong? They don't, it's.
And the teachers understand this too.
Yes.
They're not dummies either.
No.
The teachers understand this, the students understand this. Parents probably sort of kind of understand that. They don't, they haven't been there in a long time, and it's hard to recall what exactly you went through when you were in school 10, 15, 20 years ago, in my case, 120.
I'm the young one here. So.
Yeah, you are. But everybody seems to understand this, except the people that I think, as you alluded to earlier, are probably taking their directive from the companies that want a simplified process to make the curriculum, to put together the books and the worksheets and the other stuff. And in my day, it was mimeograph papers. Now it's Xerox.
The mimeograph machines, the odor from the ink.
Yikes.
Can I go get the mimeograph?
See, I was the opposite. I hated that smell,
Did you?
that alcoholic kind of smell. It
had a certain aroma. It was better than perfume for me. But. Now, Mark mentioned unions before, and you mentioned the teachers. Mm-hmm. How much influence really are the teachers if the union is trying to make sure that they have a job versus how they teach? I mean, where does that come into play? I mean, I'm a union activist, I'm a union person, but the knock unfairly on unions is, well, if you're in a union job, then you're guaranteed this. You don't have to do this. You don't have to, and that's not true. I mean, plain and simple. So where do we lay that as far as the...
Well, the unions are only there for the purpose of protecting employees that are treated unfairly or that for political reasons are put under a different microscope or a different lens than the average teacher, generally because they're a little different in their style of teaching. And that's what that all comes back to. But teachers, you're right, teachers should have a very strong say in not only what goes on in their particular classrooms, but as a team, deciding how to, because a kid goes from, early on, a kid starting to go from one class to another, different courses, different curricula, but the teachers are talking about each individual child and comparing and contrasting what their skills are, so they can work to put together what's something that's more beneficial to each child in the learning process.
And hopefully nobody's thinking that a kindergarten teacher with 20 students is there for the cushy job.
Yeah, really.
Holy crow, no. That is. But anybody who's ever taken care of 20 kids at the same time could probably vouch for the fact that you have to have you have to be strong-willed, but you have to be gentle at the same time, and it's a very tender balance.
You can't be the ogre in the classroom.
Right, it's a very tender balance between being friendly with the kids, but you're never friends with them.
And that's, I think back, a little while ago talking about the teachers who had their contracts bought out. And I think of Dr. Meltzer, I think of Mrs. Irwin, I think of Mrs. Dahl, all of the English and literature teachers, because that's really, really what I love. I think of Dr. Meltzer having myself and a friend perform Edward Albee's The Zoo Story, which I mentioned because Edward Albee passed away last week. So that's our second memoriam. We have one more to go.
No.
But I think of that, and I think of that freedom of curriculum, and I think of how the ability to translate that down through all of the grades, to make kids want to learn from kindergarten right on through to their senior year of high school, and then college or not, whatever, that's a whole other debate.
They're naturally curious from birth.
Let them spark their imagination, but let them spark their own imagination too.
Yeah, in some way it's just we all need to get out of the way and let the kids explore. And maybe that's why in Where to Invade Next, they're #1 in the world in education, because they believe in letting the kids play, to explore, to let the imagination run. We always hear about it seems like every famous scientist is always like the virtuoso piano player as well. And the connection's obvious. And we need to realize, but if and here we go back to you going, is it a conspiracy?
Is it a conspiracy?
The idea of training kids to be able to sit at a cubicle for 8 hours a day, is that why you take the arts away? You turn art into just entertainment? Instead of something you create it becomes something you consume. It's a very different way of being active or inactive in the world.
Might be by design, but it might just be kind of by accident as a subplot to making the school into a place where kids learn to be robots in later life.
But don't forget also, they're also taught that oh, you want that toy? Well, you know, Dad has to work 10 hours and Mom has to work 4 hours, so we can buy you that electronic device. Or, oh, you want a cell phone? Do you know how much, you know, money I have to, you know, spend on that, and how many hours I have to work for you to get that? So the kids are being taught that they need to have money. Now, they don't necessarily equate needing the money to being educated to get a job that will help pay them enough to buy what they want. You know, maybe they'll start scheming and say, well, maybe I'll do something different to get the money. And that's a problem. You know, but I just want to take a moment to say, happy birthday, belated to you.
Thank you.
Blow out the spoon.
Okay, hold on.
There you go.
Now, on that note, I want to bring up we had another tragedy recently. A young man, Jose Fernandez, who's a pitcher for the Miami Marlins, and he died in a boating accident. And the timing is terrible. It's very tragic because his girlfriend had just become pregnant, so he was a father-to-be, a lot. And he worked very hard to come to America.
Land of opportunity.
Having said that, it made me think of all the millions of people in the past who have worked very hard to come to America, the land of opportunity, and also the people that are working very hard now to come, particularly from war zones and from very horrible situations, to come to America, and how their struggle was great too, just like Jose Fernandez's.
Absolutely.
And we should be encouraging our fellow citizens to let all these wonderful potential Jose Fernandezes into America to make our country a better place.
Not only sports, but science and
let's not forget the art.
The arts.
And this has been Progressive Soup. I'm David Stevenson, Roberto Perez, Mark Morash. Something to think about. Any ideas, let us know. You can reach out to us, and love to hear from you. Thanks for watching.